Hey everyone, welcome to another podcast. Today is one of those special ones where we do a state of affairs with me and Miranda, talking about private practice, the mental health field, what's going on. We try to keep a pulse on things and bring up issues beyond just how to build your practice, but like looking at the impact of our world on business and on ourselves and on our clients. So, welcome to a special episode with the two of us.
That was Kelly. This is Miranda, over here, if you don't know our voices already. Um, Kelly had sent me a conversation happening on Reddit, and the general vibe of the conversation was, hey, there are a lot of therapists that are going straight into private practice right while they're in or right outside of grad school. Um, they're not providing good outcomes to clients. And what are we doing? How do we change this? Like, what needs to shift? And what I really appreciated in the converse in the even in the discussion was that people were bringing up like the systemic issues of kind of what drove this, but also really talking a little more, like really thinking more about what is the systemic issue that leads people to getting bad outcomes in our profession. And I think it's more than just about where someone's at in their journey. And so we thought it would be really fun to kind of dive into what is driving people to not have great outcomes in private practice. Like, what are all the aspects that really impact people that are not prepared to give great outcomes, regardless of how long they've been licensed? Because we actually see it on in every space, people that have been licensed for 10, 20, 30 years that actually don't know how to get great outcomes in private practice. So we wanted to dive into this conversation of like, what are the systemic issues that are specific to our profession? What's new and different now that maybe feels that is different than 10 or 20 years ago?
Mhm.
Since we've been in this for a while,
I feel
diving in.
like maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like you in your practice had more of a outcomes driven focus. You had like more training in that than I did from a psychoanalytic, kind of lens that I was trained in. Um, I think there was some things that came up innately for me that I was like, I need to ask, I need to check in, but I was never taught those things. Um, but I feel like where did you start picking that up for yourself? Like in terms of like having a
Yeah.
outcomes lens in your work.
I think there's two parts. I think that is something that was kind of innate in me,
Mhm.
that I felt really strongly if what I was doing wasn't working, then sort of like what was the point? But that I actually felt like, and it was something that they did teach in graduate school from like a general sense of like, hey, you should be preparing for termination from the beginning. You should know
Sure.
what it's like for a good outcome. You should be having these conversations. Even the miracle question, right? Which most of us had at some point in our grad
Hmm.
school training. But when I actually got into my practicum placements and into my internships, the reality was like completely different from that. Like there was no conversations as I'm asking, like, well, how do I do this work? I can't even get this person in weekly, or I can't even get them in once a month. Like, what am I actually doing? Is this really working? How are we like is this really effective what we're doing? And it always came back to, well, if they're coming back, they must be getting something out of it. And you're just going to do the best that you can with what you've got, and you are better than nothing. That was the message that I kept getting back.
Hmm.
You are better than nothing. And while I do think that's true, I I felt pretty strongly that I wanted something more than that. And when I was in still in I think I was still in grad school. I was definitely still in my internship, but I'm pretty sure I was still in grad school when I went through EMDR training. And EMDR training did have more of an outcomes focus where you were checking in what is the distress level? How is it between at the beginning and the end of the session, in between sessions? Like, is what we're doing actually working? That's probably where that started to get more ingrained. And I had some pieces of that. And what I found was when I tried to integrate EMDR into the system that I was a part of at the nonprofit, and I worked at a really great nonprofit, the clients actually didn't feel enough safety to dive
Mm,
into EMDR and dive
mhm,
into their trauma in the midst of sometimes based on crisis, but the fact that, like, well, they might not see me for 2 or 3 weeks. Like, it didn't feel like there was enough foundation around it to be
mm.
able to really utilize that in an impactful way.
Well, I think that that brings up some other points, right, of what what facilitates good clinical outcomes, right, is a system that supports that, an environment that supports that as well. And it feels like I personally am more aware of the brokenness of the system than ever before. Even when I
Yeah.
was working in them, I was aware, but I feel even more opened up to it than ever before. And it's like, did the system get worse or did I just become more aware? I'm not so sure.
Both? I feel like it's both, maybe.
Right. But right, like if this the system impacts the client's clinical outcomes for sure. Like we're
Yeah.
in, I remember being in the county and my clinicians having caseloads of 120 and being asked to see all of them at least once a month individually. And these are people that were like what we would say back then acute. I don't really love that word, but that were experiencing very intense kind of mental health crises. And then we're supposed to get great clinical outcomes with that. Like you're
And that
just
was,
talking.
and that, like, for context, how many years
Yeah,
ago was that?
I don't know, 20.
Right? So we're
Oh
talking
God,
about
what happened to time?
we're talking about 2 decades ago, before
Yeah,
any online tech companies,
yeah.
way before either of us really understood the full brokenness of the insurance system, before the insurance system was, I think, quite as broken as it is today. Like, I've definitely, when I look at one of the things that feels really broken in the system right now, it's the amount of profits that are coming out of the medical model with for-profit insurance companies kind of driving that, hey, we have shareholders to support and we need to show profits quarter over quarter, year over year, over and over again. And they're trying to pull those profits out from every scenario. And so suddenly you're looking at what's been happening with reimbursement rates, where we've had reimbursement rates that have been the same for providers, sometimes for 10 or 15 years,
Yeah.
which is wild, while the actual premiums that clients are paying has been going up the roof, plus the deductibles, plus all of the weird ways and broken systems that we've had. And then, of course, we have clawbacks and so many other places. And when you look at the system and you go, oh, the system is really broken, like it's clearly not working. And then you say, actually, this system is working perfectly.
Yeah, it's
This
doing what it's
system
meant to do.
is doing what it's meant to do, which is increase shareholder
Profit.
profits. So, like, if for us as therapists, if 15 years ago we had invested in United Health and in CVS and in, like, the
Mhm.
top five insurance companies, and
Mm,
we just took as much of that money, maybe we put it on our credit cards and we invested in that, that
mhm.
probably would have gotten us, like, that would have paid off our student loans more than actually working for that company, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think like clinicians are walking into this system that is made to not benefit them nor their clients, but then they're also coming out of a system burdened with debt. And the training I do feel is basic what we get in grad
Yeah.
school. Sometimes you can find some grad programs that are more specific, that have like a play therapy emphasis or something like that. But and then you have a lot more online universities who don't even really provide the practicums. The clinicians have to find them on their own. That's becoming more and more popularized.
Yeah.
So
Let's
there's
talk.
also this. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to talk about this like grad school part of it. And I think this is for I know sometimes having this conversation for those of you who've been licensed for a while, you might be like, "Well, how does this really impact me?" It impacts you. It impacts if you're a group provider, the what your potential employees are looking for out in the world. It impacts people deciding whether to get licensed or not get licensed, like all these other pieces. The cost of going to grad school has absolutely skyrocketed over the years. The amount of people who are working full time and going to school full time, I think, has increased over time. And the for profit organizations that cater to people going to school full time while they're working full time are charging more than ever before. Now, that basic part that you talked about, basically somebody goes in and they learn about psychology and you go,
Hmm.
here's some information about psychology. But the actual amount of hours where you learn how to do the work that you're doing is very minimal. It's very generic. And they put you into practicums where the practicums are who is setting you up to tell you how therapy works. And
Mm.
in those practicums, you're usually in a room by yourself with people. You're not shadowing anybody. You don't see what therapy actually looks like. And you're getting supervised often by people who are already burnt out and
Yeah.
overwhelmed and who were not trained well. So it's sort of um, it's like a burnt out person training a burnout person training a burnout
Yeah.
person. And you look at what happens and you go, oh, okay, this isn't working. And then we start to have people who are saying, well, let's do better, which is fantastic. Let's give put some certifications, let's do some advanced training, let's do some research based material. But then suddenly somebody who's already $150,000 in the hole from student loans is having to invest 5, 10, 20, $50,000 in going through this process, and they're still not getting paid well through the whole experience. It just
Hmm.
feels never ending.
It's also interesting because okay, so this past weekend, one of my close friends was over. She is an LCSW, and we were talking about how our different trainings were. I was like, "Oh, did you ever do therapy behind a two-way mirror?" And she was like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah." She was like, "No, I was trained in case management. I was trained," and so she was trained in a social work model. I was trained in a marriage family therapy model. I get out of grad school and I take on pretty much a social work job. I'm doing therapy, but I'm doing like mainly case management, like I learned by the seat of my pants, basically. And then now she's in private practice and doing therapy, but like our training is so different as well, and the way we approach. So sometimes when she talks about how she's doing therapy, it sounds a little like there's some social work and case management in there, which is cool because she does have a lens of like, of really understanding systems
Yeah.
in a different way than I did. And you also have a lot of variance amongst us with our licensure type and the focus and the way we approach things. And so, like, the preparation for private practice straight out of the gate, heck no. Like, it's not. And and in some states, like here in California, you cannot be in your own private practice for a few years. You can work in a private practice setting under a supervisor, but you cannot own your own business to start. But in other states like Alabama, you can.
And here's the thing that's interesting is that in Alabama, you can own your own private practice, but you still do have to be under clinical
Yes.
supervision. So
Yes.
I think one of the things that's kind of interesting in this scenario is that I think I personally I think we do people a disservice by telling people that they must be employees. um I do think there is something that feels kind of broken about that system. And I think that's based on how many employers I've seen that actually don't know how to be an employer. They're not actually great at clinical supervision. They don't really understand the business side of it. Um, in fact, in California, this is like how broken it was. This is as probably 10, 15 years ago still. In our Board of Behavioral Sciences, the laws and regulations said that you could have an unpaid intern, basically somebody who was already had a master's or doctoral degree, could come into a private practice and they could be an unpaid intern um, with
Oh,
that
yay.
space, even
How
though
lucky.
if you looked at the actual federal law, that was in absolute like federal law said absolutely not. You can only do that
Conflict.
if you are getting credits for school. Like this is not how this works. And so there's actually people who've put together systems still to try to have unpaid experiences and have these different ways of doing that. And some of those I think are done in, hey, we're trying to provide people really good training. People aren't really prepared. It costs a lot of money to like train somebody to be great um it, inside of the therapy room. So like I can see that side of it, but there's a lot of people who are living in scenarios where they really can't sustain themselves. There it is not a sustainable wage. They are trapped sometimes with clinical supervisors who are really taking advantage of them, sometimes really abusive to them, which is really unfortunate. Um, there was a scenario with a clinic, like, and people say, oh, what do you mean, like abusive? I mean, abusive. I mean, if you go and look at the back end of the therapist magazine where they put in the scenarios, there was a clinical supervisor in my city where I lived that actually chased a supervisee with a butcher knife around the office and got arrested for assault. Like, it's really gnarly. I had actually interviewed with that supervisor,
Well, I'm
and
so glad that you're here today.
I got a something doesn't feel right in this place. Like the energy fell off, and so I didn't pursue it.
Which,
But
can we just talk about, like, that's the other thing too. I think that because of the lack of preparedness and the broken system, how often you and I hear these stories of people being like, I'm really frustrated. I'm trying to do great work. I don't know if I am. But then we find out like the whole system that they're in is oppressive, it's unethical, illegal, like, and yet what do? We tend to find that a lot of clinicians are like, there's something wrong with me, I'm
mm-hmm,
missing something, I'm
mm-hmm,
bad, I'm I'm broken. But it's really that they're in a system that is not working at all. They're not empowered to know even like labor law or what good supervision feels like. So like you saying, something didn't feel right here, right? Sometimes I think a lot of us just think, well, this is how it is. And so they tolerate, or they're in these like places that are not good for them, but they're so used to it. And they think that
mm-hmm,
I got to fix it, which is a larger problem, which is we as a field are trying to stand in the gap of a broken system, but then we get down to the individual level of a
mm-hmm.
person trying to do that.
Well, and I think when people do try to step out, when people say this wage actually isn't sustainable,
Right.
or hey, there's something really wrong here. What do I do? How do I talk to my supervisor? And people start talking about you need to pay your dues. You
Mhm.
can't possibly be trained enough to go into private practice, right now, all of these other pieces. It gets really it gets really nasty. I've heard a lot of people say, how dare they not accept insurance? I had
Mm,
that, I mean, I've talked about it before. Like, I had that experience of people that I really respected and who really respected me as a clinician that said, I will not refer you clients until you are on insurance panels because I believe insurance panels are the ethical choice. And the fact that you're not on them means that you are unethical was the energy that I got. Now, at that time, again, I hadn't been licensed for 2 years. So I'm one of those people, right? When I started in private practice, that this other person probably on the Reddit post would say, "Oh my gosh, how dare this person go into
mm,
private
right.
practice? What does that look like?" And realistically, did I do great work with every person who came in the door when I was coming in through private practice? No. Did I get better over time? Absolutely. Was me working for other people in the way that the system was at that point, if I had gone to work for another group practice owner or worked for more hours at nonprofits or through the county or what have you, would that have better prepared me for private practice? No. I don't believe, and that's being around people that I really respected, like great therapists, but the way that they did their private practice did not align with me. Standing up and saying, "Hey, who's a good referral for me? Anybody who's check cleared," that doesn't align with
Mm,
me, right? Having somebody who says, "Well, I don't really know how to do this, so I'm not going to really like stand in my truth." There was one therapist that I actually rented from, um, who I think we had completely different niches, but I really noticed her standing in her truth. Of She was an
mhm,
eating disorder specialist and did intuitive eating work, and she was like, "This is how I get good outcomes." I think she was probably somebody who, like, across the hall, like listening to her or just kind of being in passing, there was a solidity that she had in that space that probably gave me a little more confidence to be in that space. But there was a lot for me to sit in that room with somebody and say, "Here's how this is going to work." And I
mhm,
think that's something that we teach in our business school that really shocks people and makes people feel uncomfortable because, in a sense, people are coming to us for marketing help, and we start integrating throughout business school of how do you get good outcomes and how do you create a dynamic that where everybody who comes in to see you gets your highest and best. And we teach people how to have a conversation on the phone, how to actually like plan for their first session, how to move into that with confidence, what to say at the end of sessions, how to do scheduling, like all of these different pieces. I think that is a part of what's really missing in our system.
mm,
I think leaves people all feeling unsure regardless of whether they go through group practice or not.
mhm. I was also thinking too, when you were mentioning this other clinician, culturally, we are disembodied. We're not attuned to ourselves, right? And a lot of our training is about attuning to the client, but not utilizing our own kind of compass. And I think that that's partly what makes, when we teach that stuff, what makes it uncomfortable is because people haven't gotten to ownership
Yeah.
of themselves and their truth. And so there's this like, oh, this certificate knows better, the school knows better. I mean, the system is set up right for to tap into our insecurities and our not knowing.
Yeah.
So that's been tapped into a lot. And then coming back to our knowing of like, no, I know like who I really love working with. I know how to help them. I know like the process. I know how long this takes, right? Coming back to our knowing, I think
Mhm.
is a huge piece of that. And we're not just, that's not just learning a process, right, that we
Yeah.
teach, but it's also like tapping into our innate stuff that has been taken away or obscured by the larger context and culture that we're in.
I think that I wouldn't say all programs, but I would say solid 3/4. And like come at us in the like send us a message if you disagree with us. But I would say 3/4 of the kind of training that we get out, and I don't mean just in grad school, I mean through the whole process, it's
Hmm.
about us taking ourselves out of the room. It really is a process where you learn to dissociate if you don't already know it. Like it's a very dissociative work in that space of, well, transference and countertransference, and like, can we really like make it about the client? This isn't about you. Can you just be there? Can you be really attuned to their experience? And there's
Hmm.
very few programs that go into that. This is a shared experience.
Right.
This is a here, whoa, I felt a lot at the end of that session. Well, you need to learn how to leave it at the office. You need to learn how to like shut it down so that you can like go into the next person. You need to be fully present for the next person. So we're going to put that in a box and leave it. And then we're going to go into the next part. Like there's just it's like over and over and over again, we get into this place where it's very easy to just become like a therapy shell, you know?
Hmm.
And I think
Hmm.
that is really sad. And I think it's part of why sometimes people will, over time start to really question, like, is therapy really what I need? I'm sometimes you'll hear people saying like, "Hey, I'm looking for coaching." You'll hear therapists say, "I can't go to another therapist," because therapists sometimes start to get burnt out in this experience of being with other people who are checked out.
Yeah.
It's not helpful.
Right. And again, we're not saying like blaming the therapist. We're talking
Mm-mm.
about like the context that
Yeah,
creates this kind of outcome for our clients and within our practices is that we are in systems that are harmful and need to be looked at and if at all possible divested from.
yeah. And I think that is like I remember the judgment in my area for people who decided not to get licensed. This is 20
Mhm.
years ago. And it didn't even occur to me not to get licensed at that point.
Yeah.
And now I understand it in like a much deeper way.
Mhm. Yeah.
And just how that happens. But again, there's this real anger and frustration and like, how dare this person not get licensed? This is going to be really dangerous to clients, right?
Mm.
And with this idea that licensure creates a safety net. And
Right.
I think like, can we talk about that for a minute? Like, does that really create a safety net for clients?
Okay, full disclosure though, I have a lot of issues with this. I have not unpacked this for myself. So
Yeah.
like I'm
Yeah.
laughing because I'm like there is a part of me that hangs on to my license. After I sold my practice, I still pay for my inactive license.
I do
And there
too.
is stuff there, and I refuse to look at it because I'm just like, I'll just keep it. I'll just keep it just in case. It's a really funny thing for me. So I'm laughing at myself, y'all, because this is an area where it's unchartered. I have not looked at it. I've just like placated it with some cash and just said, okay, I'll just kind of keep it going. I don't know why.
Well, and here's me. Like, if you're looking at the video, I put LMFT on the back of my thing because I earned that damn license, right? I went through
Right.
the process. I took the test. I paid the money. I failed the test, right? I failed, then I
Me
passed the test.
too.
I did the thing. And I know that with other therapists, the fact that I went through that process does have a certain thing that people want to
Mhm.
know that is
Yeah.
different than if I was just a person out on the street. And I do think here's the other part, it's kind of crazy. Like, I do know that process, that part of my training that it does have an impact, and there's good impacts and bad impacts. But I understand clinical supervision. I understand how to give feedback. I understand what works and what doesn't work in our process. And I think that does give me a unique perspective as a business coach, that somebody coming in who, had just a spouse that was a therapist, or that just has an MBA, or maybe they're just a Facebook ads person, they don't understand the whole process in the way that I think that I do. And so I do think it means something in the things that it means. And obviously, like, I have an inactive license, and I provide brain spotting as coaching, and I provide other kinds of healing now that are outside of the therapy room that have nothing to do with the medical model. So it's an interesting, perspective to have.
I
um
think I think it can be a safety net and it can also be the tie that binds. It really depends on what you want to do and what you're creating,
yeah.
right? So for some people it it actually holds back their what they want to create, and for other people it really does give them a context and a container for what they want to create.
Yeah, there's so
I
much
don't know
in
what it
there.
does for me right now, but we'll leave that unchecked right now, right, y'all? Because we don't need to go into like,
You don't want to process all your stuff on a podcast today, Kelly?
another day.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so let's go back to this place of, what does it mean for us as professionals, right?
Mhm.
Whether actually, let's talk about this, because I was on a podcast yesterday, or I was doing a podcast with a group practice owner in Orlando, Lauren Hahn, and she was talking about when she hires people. She has a specialized practice that does trauma. Everybody is EMDR trained. They can go through EMDR certification when they start working with her. And she talked about this space of when she's onboarding people, she tells them, hey, we're going to be tracking your outcomes. We're going to be tracking these KPIs. And when you
Mhm.
start, your KPIs are going to suck. I know that, and I want you to know that, and I want you to know that you're not doing anything wrong by the fact that your KPIs will not be good, and they will get better over time, right?
Mhm.
And we're talking about like how stressful this is for a lot of therapists, because ultimately really great therapists that have great clinical skills really don't know how to be in the room with clients and how to have important conversations. And she teaches them how to do outcomes based work, and how to really be attuned with the client, and how to get negative feedback, and how to navigate, and how just even one KPI in particular we kind of unpacked a little bit, which was the percentage of mutual terminations, that clients would feel comfortable enough in the session to say, hey, I need something different. This isn't working for me, or this doesn't work for me financially, versus calling in between sessions. The ability for the therapist to stay connected enough with the client to make it safe enough to talk about what's happening. And she said that one in particular like really wrecks
Yeah.
therapists that are coming into that, because we're not taught to do that. If they come back, that's great. If they didn't, well, that's just life, and you move on to the next person.
I think that there's, I'll speak for myself, like with having rejection sensitivity stuff, right? There's, I had to kind of work through, I still have to do a lot of nervous system regulation and all this kind of stuff to take in feedback. But we're not ever taught how that feedback can create a cycle of excellence, right? And so we don't know how to fail. We feel like, or, if we even want to call it failure, the system pressure. I mean, I was taught in county, like if one of my clients um, was hospitalized, it was probably my fault because I didn't do preventative care or whatever, right? There's
Mm.
a lot of pressure to prevent the hospitalization. Like it's on me as the clinician and not,
With
and
your
so
105 clients.
right. And so then there's also like, how do we repair? How do we check in? Like, there's this I don't want to know that I'm not doing well, right? This kind of feeling like I
Mhm.
just want to know I'm okay. And so we
Mhm.
never learned that like it's actually a positive and it's exciting because it means that the client's being vulnerable and that means that there's attunement and all these kinds of things. We're just not taught this. And so
Mhm.
I can see why, when a clinician's starting, they're told like this is going to be hard in the beginning and it's going to look like you're sucking wind here, but we need to do this so that you can build that kind of muscle. Like if you're listening, how well do you take feedback? How well are you checking in for feedback? And when you get the feedback, are you open-hearted and receiving that and kind of like looking at, okay, what lies true here of like what can I shift to improve, not in a people-pleasing way, but in this
Mhm.
kind of really understanding of like, oh, owning and being accountable to when there's misattunements, and
Mhm.
then looking at, is there something I can do to be more attuned? Like that's a beautiful gift for our clients and for ourselves. But I
And
was never taught, and I was always like afraid of rejection. You know this, like it's
I
been very
do.
hard for me. And so might be part of my neurodivergence, I don't know, but I think this is another skill that is missing for sure.
And it can be on like such basic spaces of therapists that are late to session, like
Mm,
consistently, right?
yeah.
And instead of saying, okay, what is broken in the system? Maybe I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm doing the best that I can. But maybe part of the scenario is that I'm scheduling 50-minute sessions when I really need 75-minute sessions. Maybe I'm not ending sessions on time. I don't have a system to do that. Maybe I'm putting too much pressure on myself to try to shove everything into a session. Maybe I was never taught how to navigate this process. Maybe I do need more time in between sessions. Like, what can I do systemically to change this dynamic so I could do the basic thing of showing up 90% of the time at least on
Hmm.
time, as
Hmm.
opposed to um, creating like even that unsafe of a container of I don't really know when my person is going to show up, whether we're
Hmm.
in person or online. Like, what does that look like? Yes, emergencies happen. We've all had the suicidal client, and like that happens. But I think I've heard from more friends, colleagues, and therapists that ongoing thing of, wait, I'm late for every single session. Can we take a pause and rebuild from the ground up to create something? And can we like really hear our clients that that's not a way to plan. Like that's not respectful of their time and energy in like such a basic way. Even that space of like going over in a session. We had a therapist that shared recently that they were going into the session. They told the person that they had to go at whatever time, and the therapist went over 20 minutes. That person got fired from their job because they expected that the therapist was going
Oh my
to
God.
like end on a timely manner, and the therapist didn't do that. And the therapist, basically said, well, that's your responsibility to end the session on time. And again, it's these interesting dynamics we get into, as opposed to taking the feedback of like, yeah, I need to make this much easier, especially when we're diving into deep stuff. It's not uncommon for somebody who's in the session to kind of lose track of that energetic time space. Like that's something for us to hold.
Yeah. Well, and that also just kind of shows that sometimes we aren't getting great clinical outcomes because we're operating within a system that limits our ability to do so. So if you
Yeah.
are a person who knows like longer sessions are where I shine, and then you work in an organization that's like, you got to fit this into 45 minutes and nothing less or more. Um, yeah, that has an impact.
Yeah.
There's a constraint. And this is why I love private practice
Yeah.
because it allows for creativity and an honoring of the clinician and a really like standing in more truth. Like, sure, I can't fix all of the brokenness, but I can create a system for myself and my clients that is more aligned and true to who I am and how I work than any other system can.
And I think if we are looking at the system and saying, wow, there's people who are going out into private practice that don't have the support that they need, how are we showing up as clinical supervisors? How are we showing up as employers? If you think that you can do a better thing and that you can help people get really prepared to be out in private practice, can you step into the gap and decide that you want to be a leader and a group practice owner? And can you create something that's actually sustainable for these individuals? Can we maybe even as individuals and guides for that next generation who are trying to figure out what school should I go to, could we tell people, do not get six figures of debt while you're
Mm.
going through school? Like, this is not the place to be. Can we go back and teach at some of the local universities? Can we help to direct people? I don't know. I'll be really honest. I've directed a lot of people to say, do not get a private education in this work. If you want to spend six figures on becoming a therapist, spend $20,000 on your master's degree and then spend 80 after your master's degree. Like, if you want to do it, this is where you spend the money. It's in this advanced training outside of your graduate program. There's no graduate program, in my humble opinion, that is worth six figures in this particular profession.
Well, good
I
thing
said
my
it.
daughter listens to her Aunt Miranda because I hope that works when she's like ready. When she's like, Mom, I want to be a psychologist. I was like, oh gosh, here we go.
Now I
Talk
will
to your
I
aunt.
I will say this part. I do think there is a part of me that, based on the way that psychologists are putting together have put together the PsyPact and the
Hmm.
ability to move from state to state, not all states and what have you, and comparing the PsyPact to what they're doing in social work and in
Hmm.
MFTs, the lack thereof, and counselors. I do think psychologist is actually, if you really want to go down that path,
Yes.
that's a more flexible path, but oh, the system is broken.
Not private school, please.
No private school. No, no, no. We're not doing that.
All right. Well, this has been fun. I love chatting about all of this stuff. If you have things that you want to hear our opinion on, or if you have opinion on this, please share. You know, we invite a conversation here. That's what this is about, is to start opening up and really be more aware and finding ways to navigate what's going on in the world.
And of course, if you do want more of these, go rate the podcast and say you want more of these. Whether you listen on Spotify or iTunes or wherever that may be.
Yeah.
We're glad that you're here, and we just want to remind you, if nothing else today, that like the work that we do when we're like really in our hearts and when we're down grounded into our foundation and we do it from an embodied place, it is magic. It is transformative. It is something that impacts people for generations to come. And if you're not feeling that in your bones in the work that you're doing, it's time to switch that up. It's time to recreate your system, probably both your nervous system and the external system that you're working in, to create something that is sustainable. And that is something that we do in our business school for therapists. Just a little mini pitch: if you want to work with us, come and check it out. It's fun.
All right. Until next time.